Good evening and welcome to this webinars that are anchored by the IIT Alumni Center in Bangalore. 2 weeks ago, we had one on what we are all going through, the COVID-19 pandemic, and we had three experts give us the science behind this entire pandemic, sorting out fact from fiction. And that was a webinar that was very well received both when we aired it and subsequently on YouTube. We've had a huge number of views on that. Hopefully we'll be able to follow up with another such webinar with more data as we go forward. Today we shift gears a little bit and go to the places that create these sciences. We want to talk about universities and how to make universities great institutions. Traditionally, if you will recall, India has been home to some of the best universities in the past. People talk about Nalanda and Takshashila and the rest, where we even had lots of foreign students attending courses in our universities. So this is something that I think many universities in India are now trying to do, get foreign students and foreign faculty involved. But this was being done in India several, at least a couple of thousand years or so ago. And then we had a next generation of universities like in Bombay, Madras, Calcutta. But today, sadly, what they produce in terms of outcomes is almost irrelevant. And we need to wonder why and ask ourselves that question and see what we can do. Universities are not about large campuses or many buildings. It's about a vision and a focus on the future. Currently, as you know, the world is going through four what they call great disruptive forces. The first one, of course, is the shifting locus of economic activity from the West to emerging markets, China, India, and other countries. Second is the acceleration in the scope, scale, and impact of technology. A few years ago, we would not have been able to do what we are doing today as a webinar with nearly 100 people attending and so on. The third is demographics. As our populations age, the needs will also change. We need to take care of them. And finally, this is an interconnected world, where flows of capital, people, and information are almost seamless. So with these four great disruptive forces, things have changed, and at least it's my belief that universities need to look at these realities and build a vision around this so that we are actually able to serve society and humanity, at large. Today we have two outstanding examples that can help walk us through this problem. One who spent the bulk of his life in the academic world, and another who has got legs, I think, on both sides, Dr. Naushad Forbes, student of Stanford University and also for a while on the faculty there, but currently an industrialist based out of Pune, co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, past president of CII, and very passionate about education and institution building. And he's in a fireside chat with Professor Ashok Misra. Ashok Misra needs no introduction, an alumnus of IIT Kanpur, faculty at IIT Delhi, director of IIT Bombay, chairman board of governors, IIT Roorkee, and I don't know how many other committees. But for us, fondly, he's the president of the Alumni Center, Bangalore. And that's the most important thing. So we have Dr. Naushad Forbes and Professor Ashok Misra in a chat to talk us and guide us as to what should universities be to become great institutions. Over to you, Professor Misra.
Thank you, Ashok, for the kind introduction. So I will begin by saying it's great to have Dr. Naushad Forbes, a very dear friend, in addition to being an industrialist, with us today to discuss about building great universities in India. He's from the corporate world with a huge passion for higher education, and he has interacted with leading number of leading universities around the globe. So he has actually put in a lot of time in studying what higher education should be like and so on. In my humble opinion, it's imperative for a country aspiring to be a global leader in all aspects to have a robust higher education system and to have great universities to produce thinkers, leaders, technologists, scientists, and whatever. So it's something that we cannot afford not to do. And personally, I want to see how we can get there. So Naushad also shares that passion, by the way, with me. So it's a great to talk about these things with Naushad today. So Naushad, let me start by asking you just a general question. What is your vision of a great university? That what should be its main attributes? And then, of course, we'll go into details.
So, thank you, Ashok, and thank you, everyone, for having me with you on this discussion topic. As you mentioned, Ashok, this is a topic that I'm deeply passionate about. I entirely share your sentiment that for any country that aspires to count in the world, any country that aspires to count has to have not just a handful of great universities, but to have many, many great universities. And for a country of our scale and size, we need hundreds of great universities. That's essential to our progress. It's essential to our development. It's essential to developing a sense of who we are. So, you know, and I also am delighted that you agreed to the format that that we spoke of making this very much of an exchange, and one where, as I have been encouraging you all along, yeah, I really want to hear what you have to say on all these topics as much as what I say on these topics. To me, any university is about two things. First and foremost, two things. It's about faculty and it's about students. And if you have great faculty and if you have great students, you have the two necessary ingredients to build a great university. But it's not enough to just have the ingredients. It actually has to come together and happen. And I'm sure that's the kind of discussion we're going to get into today. That what are those elements that that lead to it happening? If I look at a great university, my metric is who's there as faculty, and who's come from there, who's graduated from that institution, and what have they done. And if those two things are in place, then I see it as a great university or a great institution. So I keep coming back to this faculty and students piece. Now, there are obviously other elements. There's the relationship between research and teaching. So great universities should be about both. They should be about teaching and great teaching, because that's how you get great students and that's how you put great students out and great talent out into the world. But they're also about great research. And the argument that I have always made, as you know, is that research is essential to building any kind of greatness in an academic institution. But it's essential not because you're after the research output. It's essential because that's the only way that you can attract great faculty to the institution. And that's the only way in which you can train great talent in the form of your students in the institution. So research is absolutely essential, without question in my head. But the output that one is after is human. The output that one is after is the people who are at the institution as faculty and the people who graduate from the institution and go out into the world.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I think you've summed it up very nicely, but then we'll get into some details. I would try to break this up into two sections. Let us first talk about, in the first section, the current state of affairs of higher education in India. Today in India, we have 1,076 let's say more than 1,000 universities. How many of these can you classify as great universities, and how many of them have a potential to get there? 1,000 is not a small number.
1,000 is a large number. You know, as you well know, our university system is the most complicated in the world. We have all manner of different animals that count as universities. You have fully public universities, which are funded to a varying degree by the state. I mean, a hugely varying degree. I looked at these numbers some years ago. At the low end of the scale was JNU, which got 3% of its funding from fees, so 97% from the state. And at the other end of the scale was Bangalore University, which got, I think, something like 80-some% from fees, and only a small proportion from the state. So you have public universities, you have private universities, you have deemed universities, which only India has. You have institutes of national importance. You know, a nice term, but again, something that we have uniquely created as an institutional mechanism. And then we have, as you know, this affiliated system where you have thousands and thousands of colleges in the country that are all affiliated to usually public universities in a very loose manner, where the public university is somehow supposed to be responsible for their quality, but in practice, these institutes are actually quite independent and operate in quite an independent manner in many respects. But you have this huge complicated system that between it makes up the university system. Now, how many out of this 1,000 are great? I would say very few. Very few. Okay, let me be provocative since we're at the start of our discussion. Let me be provocative and say, arguably, we have one great university in the country. Now, why am I saying arguably one? And you might then ask me which one later on, but anyway, I'll say JNU, right? And I'm saying arguably one because take many of our institutes of national importance. I think they're great institutions, but for me, a university needs to be full service. A university, to be considered a great university, it needs to have humanities, social sciences, physical sciences, engineering, medicine, law, business, all the professions. So the professional schools together with the core disciplines that make up a university. And if you look across in those terms, then I think you have to conclude that we as a country do not have one great university. We have many great institutions again. The IITs are wonderful institutions, but they're wonderful institutions where their peer group is engineering colleges. The Indian Institute of Science is a fabulous institution. Probably, if you ask me, our greatest academic institution in the country, with wonderful research, wonderful teaching, but it's not full service. And then you take narrower fields. You take the IIMs, they're purely business. You take the NIDs, they're purely design. So I think a university, to say that we have a great university, it has to be full service. And only if we get moving in that full service direction can we truly address the points that Ashok Kamath was talking about in his introduction. If he talks, if you talk about the big challenges that the world faces going forward, those challenges tend to be interdisciplinary. They tend not to have boundaries. They don't fit neatly into engineering or medicine or whatever. I mean, look at what we're dealing with as a world and as a country just now in the pandemic. I mean, if you try to deal with it purely medically, you'll fail. It's a combination of medicine, public health, mathematics and modeling, physics, transmission, psychology of behavior, a stack of different disciplines that have to come together to address any major challenge that we face, it seems to me, as a society. So full service is my essential criteria for great university. And if you accept my full service definition, then I don't think we have won.
Well, that's a tough state of affairs. We need to fix that. You provoked me to ask a question, which I was going to bring it later, but let me ask now. I had considered all my life BHU, Banaras Hindu University, as a full-scale university. It had law, it has laws, it has arts, social sciences, medical college, engineering. Recently, they cut off the engineering and made it into an IIT. What do you think about that?
I think it's a terrible idea. Because we should be bringing institutions together. Yes. Right. Instead of doing things, in these separate activities.
Right.
And by the way, it's not only a terrible idea in BHU's case, but it's contrary to the new education policy. The new education policy is very clear in terms of what it says. Right. It actually says bring institutions together and form more full service offerings, which students can come to. So if you ask me, I think what was done with BHU was contrary to the new education policy, and it's a bad thing to have done.
I actually tend to agree with you. That's why I asked you that question.
Okay.
You mentioned a little bit about the funding. As I see it, of course, there's a dollar-rupee parity and all that business. But today, we are living in a globalized world. Research costs the same, it doesn't matter where you are, and so on. So our budget, as I saw it, for higher education this year is 39,500 crores, which approximates to about $5.5 billion, give or take maybe 5.6. I would like you to, I know it, but I would like you to say it. What is the budget of Stanford and how does it compare with it?
So Stanford's budget is about $6.5 billion, I think, each year. Now, a large chunk of that, the single largest chunk of that, is its medical school. So I think the medical school accounts for about $2 billion out of the $6.5 billion. So if you like,
still 4 billion.
It's still 4 billion. It's still a very big number. But to give you another number on the comparison, the total amount that's spent on research in Indian higher education is about 7% of total national R&D spending, which total national R&D spending in India is around, I think it's around $18 billion, something like that. So 7% of that is probably around 1.2, 1.3 billion, something like that is the number. 10,000 crores roughly, I think, is what we spend on research within the entire higher education system. Stanford spends more than that on research. So our entire 1,000 universities and institutes of national importance in the country, between them spend less on research than Stanford.
Yeah.
And that is sobering, and that's something that we do need to fix. And by the way, I think it's something we can relatively easily fix, and maybe we can get into some of that as we go along.
Yeah, just to clarify one thing, this budget is for centrally funded universities, the central government, but still it's a. So what you're saying is that Indian universities are, if I may put words, grossly underfunded, and something needs to be done about that.
We're underfunded in many areas, and if you ask me, in some areas, I wouldn't say we're overfunded, but it's quite easy to get funding. So let me give you I think the total numbers, by the way, are that as a country, we total government spending on higher education is around 1% of GDP. So that would be about just under 30 billion. Yeah, total government spending.
Right.
Total private spending on higher education, to the extent that I've been able to figure it out, is about 2% of GDP.
Mm.
And that the only way you can get that number, by the way, is if you look at the consumption surveys and spending by people on education. Because if you look at the official UGC numbers, you'll get the wrong number. You'll actually get a much smaller number.
Mm.
But the actual spending number from the erstwhile national sample surveys and from various consumption surveys actually show that it's around 2% of GDP. So totally we spend about 3% of GDP on higher education, which is not small, yeah, actually, but it's largely private spending. Actually, it's two-thirds private, one-third government, and the government splits between central government and state government, with the bulk of it in the states.
Yeah. Okay, now let me go to a little people thing. We covered a little bit of funding. In India, there are about 30 million students who are studying in higher education system. Yeah. I think 36, maybe I'm slightly under.
Second only to China, which has
second
50.
Only to China, right?
Yeah.
And this is, as a comparison, greater than the population of many countries.
It's greater than the population of Australia, Canada.
Australia, yeah. I mean, much greater than New Zealand and all that business, but even Australia, 25 million. And I say, many times we write recommendations and say top 10%. Top 10% would be 3 million. If we have 30 million and 3 million are world class, let's say, or in the top of the class, we should have an abundance of talent. But I don't see it. Do you see it in your experience? So, I mean, we should be bubbling with talent,
Well, we are bubbling with talent, but we're bubbling with talent at a certain level. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So look at it this way. I mean, no company in India, no one in India talks about an inability to find talent at entry level, to find there's an abundance of engineers that you can recruit, or pharmacists or scientists or whatever. But if you want really advanced talent, then you're more challenged.
Yes.
And that's a reflection of higher education. That's a reflection of where research is done in the country. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we do most of our research in publicly funded research in autonomous and independent institutions, mm-hmm. Instead of in the higher education system, I think bears the single blame for why it is that we are not producing talent at the very highest end. Mm-hmm. It's an easily fixable problem. It won't cost us anything, actually.
Right. We should do that. So Ashok Kamath had mentioned about these great universities. I won't go to Nalanda and Takshila. They were hundreds of years ago. Of course, in England, Cambridge and Oxford have survived 600-700 years and so on. But let's look at the more recent past. Even 50 years ago, Bombay University, BHU, Calcutta University, Madras University, Allahabad University, at least I'm from UP, so anybody wanted to get into IAS or into the sciences, doesn't matter, they would aspire to go to Allahabad University. Today, what have we done wrong that we have this greatness has frittered away? Instead of building on it, we have made sure it goes down, as a country.
So to me, and we've spoken about this in the past. There are a few pieces I think that count. One is autonomy, right? Mm-hmm. The institution needs autonomy. To me, autonomy it's a necessary but not sufficient condition for mm-hmm. greatness. If you do not have it, I think to actually be excellent is pretty impossible. Mm-hmm. So you need autonomy. But it's not enough in itself. You need to supplement the autonomy with competition so that there is an urge and competition which applies across the board. Competition where you compete for students that all our institutions, well, our institutions don't. Students compete with each other to get into them, but our academic institutions need to compete with students to attract the best students, especially the best graduate students. Second, institutions need to compete for the best faculty. So I think we're starting to see the beginnings of that today in the country, where institutions try to attract faculty from one institution to the other. I think that's a very healthy trend, because it will only enhance value that institutions place on faculty and how they can attract them, nurture them, retain them. And I think the additional piece that we have to worry about is governance. Now, what do we mean by governance? I think the reason why these great public institutions of the past declined is because of interference and because we let them. The question that I've always asked myself in my own head is, why is it that the IITs are, you know this much better than me, Ashok, and you should answer this question, but why have the IITs been able to maintain their standards instead of the same pressures from the government that would tend to dilute governance? And when I've asked myself that question, the answer that I've generally thought of is, number one, the IITs came under the central government, the union government, instead of state government. So that gave them a layer of protection from local interference. But that's only part of the answer. I think the other reason is that the institutions themselves didn't let it happen.
Yes.
That directors like you basically said, well, actually, I'm free to do what I need to do to keep this institution great, and I will.
Yeah, so the governance system of IIT is definitely good, and I'll reply a little bit to this. One of the things I did was, one of the first few things I did, I went through the statutes and the Act of Parliament, which made the IITs, word by word, page by page. And I knew how much I could push the systems in terms of autonomy. Only financial autonomy was a little bit less because you got funding from the government. But then raising funds from the alumni helped us to somewhat circumvent that. So there are a lot of opportunities. The governance system of the university system is not good. I am not happy with that. I've been on some committees and I don't like that. I didn't like that. So it needs to improve. You're absolutely correct. Let me turn a question. Is that that's what? And we have been able to maintain it in the governance system of IIT. I hats off to the founding fathers of the IIT system. The acts and statutes are very well written.
Yeah.
Now, in my experience, see, lots of private universities come up with the aim of becoming, that we will be world class and so on and so forth. I don't want to name them. And
you name them.
No, I'll let you name them. And they have this thing that we want to be the best, we are world class, global, this and that and the other. And I've seen them faltering as they are going along. A little interaction with a few. I haven't interacted with a lot because they're a huge number, 396 or something, 350. But those I've interacted with, I feel they have such an opportunity of autonomy and governance, but they don't have autonomy. I think the IIT system has more autonomy than most of the private universities. And they've let the chance fritter away. Your thoughts?
I agree. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think I think one should distinguish between, by the way, private universities and corporate universities. There are some which are set up by individual enterprises or families. And I always worry about that for institutions, unless the family sets it up, as, by the way, has happened in many of the great American private universities. And then over time, the structures are such that the family really doesn't have any say except for their name being on the institution, in what happens to the institution going forward. It develops a life of its own and a structure of its own and a continuity of its own. So I agree with you. I think that autonomy is essential to an institution to achieve greatness. And I think private institutions in the country are less autonomous than they should be. And I think when we set up their statutes and set up their structures, we should systematically address this issue of autonomy so that we ensure it's written into the parameters under which the institute can operate. But let me say more positively that if you take, I'll name some of the institutions. If you take Ashoka University, if you take Ahmedabad University, if you take a newer place like Kriya, if you take Laksha University, these are very recent institutions. They are, 10 years or less old. 10 years, maybe a long time in a company's history, but it's a tiny period in a great university's history. I mean, the great universities of the world, as you know, are, hundreds of years old. I think when one sets out to build a great university, one needs to set a long-term horizon. My sense would be that one needs to set a horizon of 30 years as a time frame to build a great university. And the famous comment, right, when Deng Xiaoping was asked, the bicentenary of the French Revolution came along in 1989, and he was asked what he thought of it, and his answer was, well, it's too soon to tell. And this was after 200 years. And I think for great academic institutions, I think we should judge what they've achieved and done with a longer time frame in mind. We should say, are they on the right path? Are they greater today than they were a year ago or 5 years ago? But to expect them to be great in 10 years or 15 years, I think is an unreasonable expectation. I think we should be building for the long run, building for permanence, building for with a 30-year time frame in mind.
Yeah, many of them, and I just mentioned that many of them have not gone beyond faculty numbers around 100, and I don't know how they'll become great, but that's okay. In the US system, since we talked about Stanford, MIT, Harvard, USC, Berkeley, and so on, they are the top ones you mentioned. But if you just go one notch lower, Iowa State, University of Massachusetts, Washington State University, University of Buffalo, Maryland, University of Maryland, so on, they are also very good. In fact, in some niche areas, they are considered to be the best in some niche areas. The curve that goes from the top universities to these is very gradual in the US. In India, it drops sharply, and it hasn't changed over the last decade or two that I'm seeing. What do we need to do? Like from here, IITs, IISC, you go to the second tier, it goes down. Third tier, it really goes down.
Yeah. You're right. Our pyramid is very sharp. It's sort of like that. Yeah. And we need to fill the pyramid in without question as we go down. If I could just talk about for a minute about the California system. The California system, the great merit of, by the way, the US system in general is that there is no central control over universities, with one big exception, which has been a crucial exception, which is research funding. But that's the one thing that is done at the national level. Everything else is basically at the state level. And as a result, you have this, but you have a lot of state role in higher education. So in the California system, you have the UC system, the University of California system, with places like Berkeley at very much the world-class research university level, comparable to the best institutions worldwide. So you have the UC system with however many 10 institutions or something. You then have the state university system, which are also pretty good. Like San Jose State, Cal State, and so on, and which is a larger system. And then you have the community colleges, which are also not bad at all. So you have this within the public system. You have this very nicely filled out pyramid. It's been actually very depressing to see actually California as a state, with probably one of the world's finest public education systems of any country in the world, let alone any state in the world, almost systematically destroy its system by underfunding it and neglecting it and cutting back on its funding. I mean, it still survived, but it survived in spite of the leadership in the state, as opposed to not because of it. So I think you're absolutely right. I think if you look around the US, the public university system is a fabulous system. That's what gives it its heft, quality, and so on. We may see names like Stanford and Harvard and Yale and so on as the big names, or University of Chicago and so on. But they are a minority. You have. By the way, if you want an illustration of a hollowed out pyramid, look at the US private university system. You have the few outstanding names. The next tier after them, you fall down the pyramid very, very fast to a much lower quality level. But when you add the public system in, it goes the pyramid very nicely.
Good point. Good point. Also, in Europe also, this pyramid system is quite good. Like I'm a little familiar with Germany. And Germany, there's the technical universities, and then next level and so on. They're quite, graded in that sense. So we need to do that in India also. Okay, one last question is what's happening today. Indian students, including those from the IIT system, when he or she goes to study abroad, they start excelling. And you've seen the number of CEOs and so on in the States are from the IIT system or the Indian education system. What are we doing wrong? What do we need to fix that these people excel in India also? They are excelling in India, but not necessarily in the R&D and technology space. Now with the startups, things are changing a little bit. What do we need to do?
I think they are actually changing. And as you say, I think they're changing because of the startup space growing in the country. But they're also changing because of a few institutions that have been big providers of talent. I mean, my favorite example of talent, if you like, is UDCT, which I think I like to use UDCT, even though it's now, what is it called? The Institute of Chemical Technology.
The chemical, right?
Yeah. But I still, the old name is what I think gave it its fame,
right.
in a sense.
Now it's UICT. So
yeah. So, and if you take that institution, right? Look at the people who graduated from it. You look at Mukesh Ambani, Anji Reddy, Madhukar Parekh of Pidilite,
Harish
Mariwala. I mean, it's an impressive list of graduates who went out and did great things with enterprises.
Right.
I think actually Professor Sharma has a lot of
to do with it.
He should take for it, because it's quite an achievement. I mean, he was himself a product.
Right.
I think of the institute. So I think we're starting to see some of those
things happen.
Stories.
Right.
and I think we're starting to see now, what you started doing, Ashok, very successfully at IIT Bombay, which is, going to alumni of IIT. First of all, you set up the first active formal alumni engagement program, I think, of any IIT. Second, you set up the first formal systematic fundraising program where you actually hired a full-time fundraiser of any, not just IIT, but any, I think, Indian institution. And those are unique things, but those are things that are essential to building this kind of greatness, because it builds the connect. There were so many IIT Bombay graduates who came back and funded buildings and funded new programs. And I think that's what gives the enterprise its flexibility and its ability to move fast without relying on much more structured state funding.
Yeah. And the incubation center, I'm very proud of. It has produced its first unicorn, by the way, recently.
So signed it.
Through Sign. I mean, there are lots of IIT alumni with unicorns, but the first one out of Sign is there. Okay, let me, lot of questions have been answered even for the future, but let me now talk about building a great university. So all this is background information. What do we need to do going proactively? Does India have educators that are futuristic, who have the ability to inspire thinking, imagination about a future that is not evident or predictable? Do we need to develop such people?
I would argue that in any walk of life, we're not short of talent. I mean, we have great talent. We just need to give people the backing to do their stuff. Getting great academic talent is tough anywhere in the world, not just in India. I mean, and I think the basic reason why it's tough is because, it's because of the nature of faculty. I think the greater the faculty, the more the faculty thinks that they do not need management. In fact, they would be resentful of anyone who tried to manage them.
Yeah.
So academic leadership is a very special field. How do you actually provide direction to a really talented group that doesn't think it needs direction? And it comes from respect. So you have to first be outstanding in your own right, and then you need to combine that outstanding in your own right capability with institution building and knowing how you can form a vision of the future, get enough people in the faculty to buy into that vision, get funders and structure to back it too, and then you go off and do it. So it's tough. It's not an easy job.
Right.
I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from John Hennessy, who was president of Stanford for 16 years. And John Hennessy used to say that when he was asked, that you should do it, he would always be asked, when he was traveling around India, you must set up a center in India. And his answer was always, look, you have to attract my faculty to want to do this. Because he says, I cannot tell my faculty to do anything. He says, or at least I can tell them, but they'll ignore me. And he said, he used to have this statement where he used to say that getting faculty to do anything is like herding cats. And there's only one way in which you can herd cats, which is you have to move the food. So you need an abundance of resources, and then point the resources at the priorities that the institution has. And that will attract the right kind of activity from the faculty.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the story Tom Callett tells us, very famous electronics person from Stanford, since you're Stanford. He did his PhD from MIT, if I remember correctly, and he was looking to come back to India. He wanted to join IIT, I think it was IIT Kanpur. And they said, okay, we'll think about it. But they thought about it too long. And look, Stanford grabbed him, and what all he's done.
If I think about,
I mean, there's just one example. There are many more.
But there are many, I think our institute, by the way, I think it's the same in companies. Huh? In companies, we used to have this old mindset that great graduates would simply be lining up outside our gates. Yeah. And that mindset is such a terrible mindset, because we have to go out and attract the best graduates. We have to really inspire them with what we're doing and say, here's why we need you. And this is what you can do if you join us. And our institutions have to do the same thing to attract good faculty. We have to compete for the best faculty.
Absolutely. So, great university.
Ashok, you did it. I mean, in your time at IIT Bombay, let me ask you a question. How many faculty did you hire?
Oh, I don't have the number on my fingertips.
It was over 100, if I remember.
But it was definitely over 100. Yeah. And just to give you another instance, we were in California, and we have a system that we can offer visiting faculty, position, as long as the director and 2-3 deans are there. And we had the required number. And we saw some people in Santa Clara, and the guy said, how long when will you let us know? I said, can you wait till 6 p.m.? 6 p.m. we had the appointment letter, and this was talking like 4:30 p.m.
Yeah.
So we had to do things like that. So, and this is the first time that we attracted people who had offers from IISC but joined IIT Bombay, which normally didn't happen in the system. IISC was a more preferred one. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we have examples of it. I think
so it can be done.
Yeah.
So great universities need outstanding leadership. Your comment on the importance and the process of producing academic leaders in India. I think there's a dearth of academic leaders.
I agree. I think part of the problem is that we only see the vice chancellors, but where do vice chancellors come from? I mean, I think that's where I think US universities have this sort of hierarchy. The thing that people talk about US universities and the US as being this, non-hierarchical system. Let me say, that's not true. I mean, if I think about Stanford was an incredibly hierarchical place. I mean, you were very clear who the president was, and the president had a lot more power than even the provost. The provost had a lot more power than the deans. The deans had a lot more power than the department chairs.
Yes.
And the department chairs were sort of in between the faculty and the dean, and varied in their power. But I think that hierarchy is what developed leadership. And the people who could make something of a department, and move it up in terms of research quality, teaching quality, standing among peers, and then become a dean and do the same at the school level, and then do the same at the provost level, the overall academic leadership level. That was their source of precedence. And I think while we have a hierarchical system, I've always sensed that our institutional structures are actually less hierarchical, and there's less power. That the president and the head of the institution here has less power than the president of an American university. I think they have more power and autonomy and more resources at their disposal to get the institution to move in a direction. And it's not only the president, it's all down the system. So I think that's how we have to do it. We have to consciously, systematically develop people at young ages. I mean, by the way, you mentioned the German system. I think the German system is a good system outside of the technical system. It's a good system not to learn from. Because, over there, if you're a professor for life, you're an employee of the state. You don't have to do anything actually after that. And it's, they've been struggling with reforming the system for years. But again, with the exception of the technical system, but the wider university system is a it suffers from just this problem of developing academic leadership in a structured way at the
Right.
of the institution.
Yeah, that's true. I'll come back to that a little bit, but let me ask one other question. Since we're talking now great universities, what we need. And I feel that for any great university, you already talked about teaching and research, but I also think there should be centers where innovations and inventions happen. There should be centers that promote entrepreneurship in today's world, like in MIT and Stanford, it's happening. I'd like your comment on that, especially on the latter two. Teaching and research, you've already talked about. So
I believe, okay. So I have a bias. I mean, and this is a personal bias, but my bias is that, to come back again, I think the institution is all about research and teaching. It has to first get those two things right. And if it gets those two things right in abundance, meaning that, the research is world class and the teaching is world class, then you worry about anything else. But until you've got the research and the teaching world class, I would see anything else as a bonus.
Okay.
So I would see, centers for, for centers for incubation centers for entrepreneurship, centers for innovation in a particular subject, as all very good, useful things to do. But in a way, I would see them as responding to what the faculty wanted to do. So if the faculty want to, move in a particular direction, set up a center and a program of research in a particular area and bring in companies and so on, wonderful. The university should support that effort by the faculty. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about research and teaching.
Okay. And if it's good research, I think automatically some percentage of that will go into innovation and so on.
Exactly.
And okay, that's a good,
and if not,
good point.
it will go into either innovation and entrepreneurship, either in the case of the professor, or in the case
the student.
of the student. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now again, this is a little about governance, but in a different sense. That if you have to have a great university, you have to have absolutely immaculate strategic planning, vision, and so on. In the universities of 1076 that we have in India, I think some of them are lacking in this, but let's say greenfield. And what would you do to develop good strategy and vision so that you take it forward to these things that we are talking about?
I think first you kind of need the demand for it. I think it's a very good question. How do you get it? And I think because, okay, sometimes you end up being lucky. You get an Ashok Misra, you get a Pankaj Chandra as your leader, who decides to make something happen in the institution, right? How do you if you're not lucky in those terms, what do you do? And I think there's a role for the board, and this is where the governance comes in. That I think boards of trustees have a really important role to play in an institution. And one of the key roles that they have to play, one of their roles is to bring in resources, but they also should bring in direction. And they should bring in direction in terms of, a demand that says, okay, given this is where the institution is now, where will it be in 5 years' time? Where do you expect it to be in 10 years' time? Let's lay out a roadmap for that. And that roadmap has to be crafted not by the board, but by largely the academic leadership, with board involvement and pushing and cajoling and so on, and then with lots of involvement by faculty. So I think putting that together is important. You know, when I've talked to people about what led to, well, Stanford's rise in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and also to, you know, like USC more recently and so on, the general view would be that it's the academic leadership played a critical role, but not on their own. It's the academic leadership, it's a group of people who were in it for the long haul. So it's not good enough if you're there for 5 years. You need to be there for 10, 15 years. And you need that kind of horizon of the collective academic leadership, you know, 5, 10 people who really are committed to building out the institution, backed up by, I think, a board that is also long-term committed, backed up by that board's willingness to bring in resources to back whatever the institution wants to do, and it's constantly demanding more from its academic leadership. I think it's that combination of things. So,
yeah.
And then how do you actually put the right strategy and so on together? I think that we have bright enough people to do, but I think first is the demand that you must do it.
Yeah. So I'll take you, since you mentioned IIT Bombay so many times, I'll take you back to IIT Bombay. One of the few institutions in the country, I would say, which had an advisory council, which went beyond the board. Board was looking at more routine stuff, but a lot of our planning, thoughts, how to set up the sign, and how to take the R&D to different level. I remember you gave, instead of my Dean R&D, you gave a talk on R&D, so how R&D should be done at IIT Bombay in the advisory council. So the advisory council had a huge role to play in that, and the advantage is the advisory council we picked ourselves. Nothing to do with the routine admin, and that helped us a great deal. You were on it for the entire term that I was at IIT Bombay, so can you give your comments on that?
I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed it enormously, Ashok. And I enjoyed it enormously because you could see things happening. You could see, you know, discussions turning into action, and that was just wonderful to see. You know, it's a time commitment. You know, we didn't have to spend much time in the advisory board. But if I look at the board of trustees at Stanford, has each meeting is 2 days long, including committee meetings, but each meeting is 2 days long, and they have 6 meetings a year. So it's not a small time commitment. I don't know how they're operating in the virtual world, but you know, that's what they would do. And these are people who, you know, they're pretty, you know, it includes the head of Google, who would give up 12 days a year to be part of, and you know, this kind of effort. And I worry a little bit about how we pick our, you know, for example, the government picks very good people to be the chair of some of our leading public institutions. But you know, if the role is limited to an hour or two every quarter, I don't think that's adequate. I think it needs to be much more intense and much more, you know, I think it needs to be, for a university, I think it needs to be a couple days every quarter.
Okay, I'll come to teach research a little bit. Liberal funding of research is needed. The funding of IITs being at the top of the heap in the Indian system, and typically their funding is 100th, 150th, whatever, of funding that an average professor at MIT would get. And we try to compare ourselves with MIT. Now, should there be accountability also, especially in the research along with the funding? It's a long-term thing, longer than what, as you mentioned, what an industry would have on the horizon. what roadmap would you suggest? Along with this, I'll throw in one more question. Are monetary incentives important for the academic faculty who are doing research and so on? So that I've combined 2-3 questions into one.
Sure. I'll start with the second question. That I think monetary rewards need to be adequate, but I'm not sure that's what necessarily encourages the best work in an academic setting. I mean, you need a well-funded faculty member who, earns more than enough such that they're not worried about, how they live, comfort of the family, all of that. So they need to be above a certain threshold of comfortable funding. Having said that, then beyond that, I think it's what they can do. It's do they get resources to hire colleagues so that they can undertake a larger research effort? Can they support? Do they get really great PhD students who can be part of their research programs? And the roadmap that I'd suggest is actually, I mean, it's something that I've, it's a point that I've made very, very often, like a dragging gramophone record, which is this point that I mentioned earlier about we chose early on to do most of the public research in autonomous institutions. So 85% of public research in the country is done in autonomous institutions. It's done in DRDO, DAE, Department of Space, CSIR, DST, agricultural research. I mean, all of our autonomous R&D institutions. And less than 15% is done in the university system. If you look, that's the one area where we are completely different to the rest of the world. The rest of the world does the bulk of its public research in the higher education system, both the public and the private higher education system. And the public and the private higher education system in many countries, certainly in the US that we were talking about, faculty compete one with the other to write research proposals to the National Science Foundation or the National Institute for the National Institutes for Health, which is the biggest funding agency in the US government, for example. They write these proposals and they compete one with the other to get funded. And they need to get funded because that's the only way they can support their PhD students, because the university charges PhD students full fees. And the PhD students need to get, but all PhD students by and large are funded. They don't pay their own fee. And they're funded by research proposals that their faculty write. The faculty get that research funding, and that research funding then is used for the PhD students that the professor has. It's not a comfortable system. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on the university and on the faculty to get funded, and there's a lot of competition involved. But I think it's an effective system in terms of quality and in terms of the flow of funds to the university system. Stanford, which is famous for its connections with industry. Industry is a very minor source of research funding at Stanford. 80%, I think, of all research funding at Stanford comes from the federal government.
Right. So again, some of it is repetition, but great universities thrive with a vibrant and zealously guarded sanctuary for academic freedom, research freedom. They should be the place where fundamental research, applied research, and in India's context, some directed research, because we need to solve some problems of the country, should be done. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that very much. Yeah, very much. I think you need that independence of operation, that independence of thought, and you need to protect it. You know, you need to protect it in terms of actual governance structures. I mean, the US university system uses this thing called tenure. I think, by the way, I think that's, by the way, the reason why our public universities in India have greater professorial autonomy. I'm saying, you know, not the institution, but the individual faculty member. They have, I think, greater freedom than in many private institutions because they can't be fired. I mean, because that's the nature of public employment. And that's a good thing in the academic system. You know, that's what gives them, I think, that freedom to pursue things that they think are right to pursue. Now, if you're the academic leader who's trying to get the institution to move in a particular direction, you probably wish that your faculty had a little less freedom to ignore you. But at the end of the day, it's a good thing if you're. It's essential to, I think, have high quality faculty.
Talking of faculty, if you want high quality faculty, in most countries, US being one example, but in England, I see that a lot also, somewhat in Europe because language is a problem. But otherwise, I see that the faculty hiring should be as international a competition as possible. But we don't do that in India. Why? What can we do to attract? We talk about international students and so on, which is all right. I'm not so thrilled about it because there are enough students in India. You know, so if international students come, they take away the seats of the Indian students. Well, but faculty, you know,
I think we should attract international students for other reasons.
No, for other reasons,
But I agree with you.
But I'd rather get good faculty than that'll attract everything.
I agree with you. I think we should be much more aggressive in going out and trying to recruit the best faculty from everywhere. Now, earlier there used to be restrictions, as you know, on especially in our public institutions on hiring nationals. But then they loosened it up, at least to people of Indian origin. And then they, I think, have loosened it up further, where you have to come up with your own special designation and so on, and you can get around the system and the rules. But I think it's up to the institution. I think, again, sorry to embarrass you, but you did. You went out and hired. Okay, they were Indians. But they were Indians who had graduated in the best institutions worldwide. Their other job opportunities were at international institutions, and you attracted them to come to IIT Bombay. And Pankaj Chandra did the same at IIM Bangalore and now at Ahmedabad University. And many are doing just this. That's what Ashok has been doing too. So I think it's up to the institution. I think we have to all get into this mindset that we have to go out and get the best faculty for our individual positions and figure out how to do it, and then go and look worldwide. What I would love to see is us getting many more foreign faculty.
Yes.
That would be a good indication. That would be a statement of us doing, us competing with the best worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, one example is, you probably have heard of it, KAUST, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. And, every day I hear such and such professor from England and from Holland and from Singapore has joined, and they have been able to attract a huge number of foreign faculty. We need to do something like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, last, a couple of questions. You have advocated, and you mentioned that some universities or institutions should become full-fledged universities. So let's take the example of IIT. Let's say IIT Delhi or IIT Bombay. What would you say? Should they aspire to break loose and?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe actually that what is in shortest supply in our higher education system? What's in shortest supply is excellence. And when you ask people, where did you go to an excellent institution, you can sort of feel it, right? You feel it in the IIT, you feel it at NID, you feel it in the IIMs. Why do you feel it? They always say that excellence, what is it's sort of in the water, yeah. And this excellence is much tougher to create than to add fields. So I believe our best bet for building great full service universities is that all of our original IITs, at least, and then later the newer set, but all of the original IITs, the Indian Institute of Science, NID, all the IIMs, they have ample land, regardless of what they might claim, but they have ample land if you compare the institution with almost any other university worldwide. So they have ample land. They need to set themselves a goal of becoming full service universities in like a 10-year period. And then they should be abundantly funded. They should be funded by the government, where they're told, look, go about this and we'll give you 1,000 crores. Right? And build out not service departments in English and the humanities and social sciences and so on, but build out first-rate, equally excellent programs where you hire the best faculty in all of these fields.
Perfect. Last two questions. I would then take the audience questions. What should be the role of industry in developing and supporting great universities?
Well,
because now the industry in India is doing well, in several sectors.
I think the single biggest role of industry with our university system is to hire talent. And, I used to always get very hassled that industry was willing to pay more for someone finishing with a BTech degree from the IIT than for a PhD degree from the IIT. This is a failing of Indian industry. And it's, I think we need to respect the talent that's coming out of the system, look for it, incentivize it, attract it. And from all walks of life. So we need to attract good people coming out in the social sciences and the humanities as much as we hire engineers. So I think that's the single big piece. Second is obviously research. If we did a lot more research within industry, that would create an automatic pull on talent coming in there and the output of the research from academic institutions. So I think these are the two key things that we should do, and then everything else, including funding, research, and so on, should follow.
We want people like you, to advocate with the industry to make these things happen. And I'm sure IITs will not be faltering. My last question to you is, you're leading the effort from the CII side. CII is Confederation of Indian Industry, to establish a world-class university, global university, and so on. We would like to hear what you're doing and how you're aiming to make it a great university.
Well, it's been a long-term passion and dream to do something like this, because for all the reasons that we've been talking about, I think the country really needs great universities, great full service universities. So we should do something. And we thought that if industry collectively can do something that is much better than any one industry can do. So any one company, instead of each company doing its own thing, how can we collectively do something much bigger and grander and greater? And, when I was president of CII 5 years ago, I had lots of conversations with Chandrajit Banerjee, the Director General, about universities and higher education and so on in the country. And then right after, we've started on this effort. And we have a great group. I mean, you're part of it, Ashok. You've been part of it right from the beginning. And we have a great group of people from industry and from academia who are helping conceptualize what this university will do. So if I had to pick three differentiating elements of what we're trying to do. First, we want to do affirmative action in a very unique and different way. So, you know, we all have this belief in our founding group, which you, all of whom you know so well.
Yeah.
You know, that we all have this clear thought that none of us have any interest in doing a university for the rich. We want to do a university that will truly identify the best talent that we have in the country. By the way, just as the IITs do, right? I think the IITs historically have been amongst the most accessible institutions for talent around the country. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, the whole concept of coaching classes has diluted that power of really identifying the best talent, but it's still there. It's still there to a greater extent than in other institutions. And our thought is that CI companies work with a whole bunch of schools. We think with around 30,000 schools in the country. And these schools very often are in relatively poor areas. They're in areas where you have a lot of disadvantaged people. And so they look, can we identify talent, you know, when kids are 12, 13, 14 years old, and then give them all of the support and input that they need such that they can then get into the institution on merit. And we will admit students on a need blind basis. So if they can get in, we will admit them. So that's the first piece. The second piece is how do we combine great theory with practice? So good teaching in the classroom, but combined with actual practical exposure. So if we're doing public policy work, using CI's connection with the government, whether union or state or local. If we're doing any work in an area that a company is involved in, then connecting with that company, not just for internships, but for teaching of actual courses and practical exposure during the coursework. That's the second piece. And the third piece is careers. You know, that to expose students to all those linkages as they are studying, that would enable them to first know what career options they have, whether in industry or in NGOs or in government. They should know what the options are, such that they, and form some of those linkages such that they can then chase their dreams later on. So I mean, I think it's a fabulous project.
Yes.
We hope it sees the light of day soon.
Yes, and all our good wishes, and of course I'm part of it, are with you to make that as a great university. So there are a lot of questions in the Q&A box, and since I didn't get time to look at them, I requested Ashok Kamath to take a look, and he will take the question answer session now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
On the attendees.
First of all, there have been lots of nice comments here. Professor Anil Sahasrabudhe, gave a lot of information about some of the reforms that have happened over the past few years, including, in the NEP 2020, the concept of the National Research Foundation with the 50,000 crore to be made available, although that is still a small number in the context of India. Also about the concept of the institutes of eminence that came up along with autonomy and the NIRF rankings. Possibly there are ways to improve all of that, but at least there are some steps taken in the right direction.
Yeah.
Another interesting comment came from Professor Deepak Phatak, who has liked the conversation and wants to share it with, as he says, a few thousand faculty members and a few hundred VCs and directors around the country. So, so that's a good sign.
Thanks to both Anil and Deepak.
Yeah, so I will start by asking some things in the value chain. And I think the first question that was asked by somebody was, what is the relationship between the quality of K-12 education and higher education in the scheme of things in our country?
You know, Ashok should answer this question as well, by the way. But it's, we may blame our school system for many things. Yeah. Rote learning, people come out where they just have to mug up the syllabus and so on. But I think the quality of students that we get coming out of our school system is first rate at the end of the day. I mean, regardless of what we do to them in schools, they still come out just fine. And I think they come out just fine for two reasons. One, there's simply inherently enough talent in the country. And it just shines through regardless of what happens to them. Second, whatever one may say about rote learning and so on, which they have to go through, the rote learning provides some fundamentals that sticks, that's useful to the students later on. And the rote learning is combined with the vibrancy, let me use the really polite term, the vibrancy that we see in our daily life the moment you step out of the school or the house. India is a tremendously vibrant country, and you're assaulted, every sense is assaulted constantly. And so I think, we're not Singapore. I don't want to offend Singapore, but we're not Singapore. So Singapore needs to worry about rote learning, because when you go out onto the road, you're not confronted with every possible image. For us, even if you had rote learning, the moment you step out of the gate, you are hit with so much stuff that I think our students do just fine. And I think if you want proof of that, I mean, our students coming out of the same schools get into the very best academic institutions everywhere in the world without a problem. So I think we have an abundance of talent. I don't think we need to, are there things for us to address in schooling? 100%, especially in terms of quality at the early days and so on. Of course we have to, but from a higher education perspective, hey, we have an abundance of talent, let's make more of it.
Okay. So another interesting question that's been asked is, we talked so much about a full service university. That's the need that you both have articulated. And part of the problem in having that seems to be, like, for example, when you get into an IIT, you get slotted saying so-and-so, this is your rank, you go to electrical or computer science. If this is your rank, you go here. So we start slotting way too early. So is there a chance of doing away with something like that? Or is it, or do we even talk about a necessity of doing away with something like that? Maybe Prof. Misra is a good candidate.
I'm gonna sharpen the question for Ashok. Okay. He worked for a long time to try to get IIT Bombay to adopt a credit system for students at the undergraduate level. Ashok, you should talk about that, because I think the resistance didn't come from the students, it came from the faculty, and you should talk about being able to do that.
Yeah, so credit system was there, but my thing was that if they can do undergraduate research opportunities, and it was all right, and people started doing that. What the question basically is that if you have a full-fledged, today there's a pecking order. You get a JEE rank and you get electrical engineering or chemical engineering, and there's a very difficult chance to change it. Now, if you're a full-fledged university, let's say IIT Bombay, and then you want to go into economics, but you got something else, and so on and so forth, that movement is a little bit easier in US universities than in the IIT system. But we need to develop a system for that, obviously.
I'll make one additional comment. I think IIT Hyderabad and what Uday Desai started at IIT Hyderabad, took us quite far in that direction, where students were much more flexible in being able to move from one field to the other. And I think it's easier in a new institution than in an existing one, because you're not fighting against, you know, decades of working in a particular way. But I think we need more of those kinds of examples.
Yeah. See, the other thing is, once the country starts appreciating the talent in different fields, whether it's economics or physics or mathematics or computer science, if they have equal opportunities to excel after they graduate, then all these differentiations would go away. But right now, there's a pecking order. You ask a person, oh, you know, blindly they want to do computer science if the rank is high.
Yeah,
you know,
and no one wants to do civil engineering.
Yeah, and all that has to change somehow. You know.
So you know,
but industry has a huge role to play in that. So if industry can set that right, then we should be in the right path.
I agree.
Yeah. So we normally, you know, kind of wind down at about this time. There are quite a few other questions that have been answered during the entire 1.5 hour session we've had, because a lot of that related to philanthropy and money coming in and resources and the quality of the faculty and so on and so forth. One of the things I want to say here is that this has been recorded and will be available no later than Monday, because there have been some people saying we should distribute this across to faculty heads and so on and so forth. So we should be able to do that, and this will be available to, you know, all of you who are watching this and our entire mailing list, as a matter of fact, by about Monday. And there are some other questions which I will take the liberty of sharing with both Dr. Forbes and Professor Misra. And, you know, if you have more thoughts on it, if you can, you know, kind of briefly respond to them separately at a later date, we will share it again with you know, those who view our webinars. So that'll be. So I will now hand over to Dr. Sushila Venkatraman to do a wrap up. And Sushila, over to you.
Thank you. So, little more than a year ago, in what's today seems like a completely different time and age, in February 2020, we had the IIT Industry Conclave in Bangalore. And one of the most important issues that was discussed in depth was the skills that are required for India in its journey to global leadership. And today, that's exactly what we've spent a lot of time talking about, how we are going to do it, how it can be done. I like Dr. Naushad Forbes saying that it is a problem that can be solved. It's not insurmountable, as sometimes we tend to think. While at the entry level, we have good talent, that's entry level into industry, we have good talent. It's at the advanced level that we are having a big challenge. And clearly that's the reason why our university system needs to step up and be able to create that outstanding talent. We've had a very interesting and thought-provoking chat between Dr. Naushad Forbes and Professor Ashok Misra on building great universities in India. This was a talk that touched on a wide range of issues, filled with stories, examples, and anecdotes. We've actually seen a roadmap that got laid out for us as a nation. Just a few takeaways. We started with a definition of what a great university is. And just a few of the points. One is that the greatest universities obviously have to be able to address the biggest challenges. And these big challenges need interdisciplinary work. And therefore, the university has to be a full service university, very much in line with what the NEP says. So for all of this, obviously, we have to attract great faculty and students. And of course, the bottom line is excellent teaching and research. And we need hundreds of these great universities across the countries so that we can fill out the pyramid. And we did have a good bit of discussion around what that is. So how do we go about that? And here were, I think there were a number of wonderful points, great suggestions, very good action points. So I'm just going to go over a few that I've kind of jotted down. The first is autonomy. The second is competitiveness, both for faculty and students, not just within India, but also thinking globally about both faculty and students. Every good university needs nurturing and needs very good governance. Academic management and leadership is a little different and special. And therefore, at every level in the university, there has to be a place where, in a sense, excellence can be built, and excellence is in the air or in the water when you step into that university. We have to build for permanence, and thinking about a time horizon less than 30 years to look at what impact the university has created does not make sense. So to be able to build that, we need a good board of trustees which will be able to guide the institution, both in terms of putting together a vision and a roadmap and a plan and strategy, etc. Obviously, we have to hire the best faculty and again, these have to be from across the world and be able to focus on challenging areas of research. There was a bit of discussion around alumni relations and funding and why those are so critical to the university. We talked about the role of industry and, while at one level, industry has been hiring a lot of students at the entry level, how can industry now step up and say, can we hire students at the higher level of expertise? And of course, as industry starts to do more and more research, there is going to be a demand for excellent students in industry as well. So all in all, educators should inspire and help students to imagine what an unknown future would look like. As we address the big problems, every discipline is going to be equally important. And therefore, the importance of the university model that we saw in today's discussion. I like the very hopeful tone and the very actionable tone of today's discussion. I think it just makes it so interesting for all of us, because we know that this is not an unsolvable problem at all. And we've seen a lot of good actionable points come out of today's discussion. We're very happy that our audience really enjoyed this discussion, as we saw from the comments. And so thank you very much, Dr. Forbes and Professor Misra. It was indeed very inspiring and very interesting. So thank you very much. And here's to a wonderful future.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I hope when we meet a few years from now, we'll be able to say that there are at least 10 or 20 Absolutely. Great universities.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think without question. We're on the path, on the road. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Bye. Good night. Bye.